They said he'd never amount to anything, that his dreams were too big for someone like him. But when 17-year-old Tyler Bennett wheeled onto that stage, clutching his guitar with trembling hands, he was about to prove that the human spirit knows no limits. Tyler Bennett had always been different, born with spina bifida. He'd spent his entire life navigating a world that wasn't built for someone in a wheelchair. In the small town of Millbrook, Wisconsin, where Friday night football games drew bigger crowds than the annual Corn Festival, being different meant being invisible. And for Tyler, invisibility had become both his shield and his prison. The Bennett family lived in a modest ranch house on Oakwood Drive, where Tyler's bedroom had been specially modified with ramps and accessibility features. His parents, Robert and Michelle Bennett, had sacrificed everything over the years. Robert worked grueling 12-hour shifts at the paper mill, while Michelle balanced her job at the credit union, with Tyler's endless physical therapy sessions and doctor visits. They loved their son with a fierce devotion, but even love couldn't shield him from a world that often turned away. At Millbrook High School, Tyler existed in the shadows. He was the student teachers addressed with that particular gentleness, as if speaking too loudly might somehow hurt him further. His classmates weren't intentionally mean, but they treated him like delicate china that needed careful handling. Most days, he ate lunch alone at the corner table by the cafeteria windows, watching the popular kids laugh and joke at their center tables, while he remained an observer of a life he felt he could never truly join. But Tyler had a secret. Every afternoon, when the school buses pulled away and the hallways fell silent, he would wheel himself to the abandoned music room at the end of the arts corridor. There, covered in dust and forgotten by the budget cuts 3 years prior, sat an old upright piano with several broken keys and a guitar with frayed strings that the music teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had left behind when she retired. In that forgotten room, Tyler transformed. His fingers, which sometimes struggled with the simple task of zipping his backpack, moved across the piano keys with surprising grace. His voice, barely a whisper in the crowded hallways, soared through the empty space with a richness and depth that seemed impossible from someone so young. Music became his refuge, his secret language, his way of expressing everything he couldn't say in the world outside those dusty walls. Tyler had discovered his gift by accident during his freshman year. While waiting for his mother to pick him up after a particularly brutal day of whispered comments and awkward stares, he had wandered into the music room, simply looking for a quiet place to be alone. The piano had called to him somehow, and when he pressed those first tentative keys, something magical happened. The sound that emerged wasn't just music. It was pure emotion given voice. For 3 years, Tyler taught himself to play by watching YouTube videos on his phone, practicing until his fingers cramped and his voice grew hoarse. He learned to play everything from classical pieces to modern pop songs, but it was when he sang his own compositions that something truly extraordinary happened. His lyrics spoke of longing, of dreams deferred, of the ache of watching life from the sidelines, but they also carried an undercurrent of hope that he hadn't even realized lived within him. The bullying wasn't overt at Millbrook High. It was worse in many ways. It was a casual dismissal, the assumption that Tyler couldn't possibly contribute anything meaningful to group projects, the way conversations stopped when he wheeled up to join them. Brandon Sullivan and his crew of football players weren't necessarily cruel, but their laughter seemed to follow Tyler down every hallway. Ashley Morrison and her cheerleader friends would offer him sympathetic smiles that somehow felt more cutting than outright insults. The breaking point came on a gray October afternoon during his senior year. Tyler had been selected, almost as an afterthought, to participate in the school's annual talent show. Mrs. Anderson, the drama teacher, had approached him with that familiar tone of careful enthusiasm, suggesting that perhaps he could recite a poem or share something inspirational about overcoming challenges. The underlying assumption was clear. Tyler's talent would be his story, his disability the source of whatever inspiration he might offer. That night, Tyler sat in a converted bedroom, staring at the talent show permission slip. His parents had signed it eagerly, their faces bright with the hope that their son might finally have a moment to shine. But Tyler felt the familiar weight of expectation settling on his shoulders. Everyone wanted him to be inspirational, to be the brave, disabled kid who made them feel good about themselves for 3 minutes before they went back to their normal lives. He almost backed out a dozen times over the following weeks. The other participants were typical high school talent show fare: dancers, comedy acts, a girl who could solve a Rubik's Cube blindfolded, and Jackson Reed, the quarterback, who planned to showcase his surprisingly decent beatboxing skills. Tyler felt out of place among them. His secret afternoon sessions in the music room, feeling suddenly foolish and naive. But something happened 2 days before the show that changed everything. Tyler was making his way to his last period history class when he overheard Brandon Sullivan talking to his teammates near the lockers. They were discussing the talent show, laughing about the various acts they'd heard about in rehearsals. "I heard the wheelchair kid is doing something too," Brandon said with a snort. "Probably going to give us one of those inspiring speeches about never giving up or whatever. My mom loves that stuff on Facebook." The laughter that followed wasn't malicious, exactly, but it was dismissive in a way that cut deeper than any outright cruelty ever could. Tyler felt something shift inside him in that moment, a spark of defiance that had been buried under years of careful invisibility. The night of the talent show, Millbrook High's auditorium buzzed with the energy of proud parents and enthusiastic students. The venue wasn't much to look at: worn red velvet seats that had seen better decades, a stage with lighting equipment that flickered occasionally, and acoustics that made everything sound slightly hollow. But for performers waiting backstage, it might as well have been Carnegie Hall. Tyler sat in his wheelchair in the wings, his guitar case balanced across his lap, watching the other acts take their turns. His hands were shaking, and he could feel his heart hammering against his ribs. Mrs. Anderson kept checking on him with worried glances, clearly concerned that he might have another panic attack like the one during rehearsal the week before. The acts progressed predictably. Samantha Clark's contemporary dance routine earned enthusiastic applause, and Jackson Reed's beatboxing had the audience laughing and cheering. Each performance felt polished, safe, designed to entertain without challenging anyone too deeply. Tyler began to question his decision to deviate from his planned inspirational reading. When Mrs. Anderson announced his name, the applause was polite but subdued. Tyler could see his parents in the third row, his mother clutching his father's hand so tightly her knuckles had gone white. He wheeled himself to center stage, the spotlight creating a warm circle around him that somehow felt both protective and exposing. The auditorium fell into that particular kind of respectful quiet, reserved for moments when people aren't sure what to expect but know they should be supportive. Tyler positioned his guitar, his fingers finding the familiar strings that had been companions through countless lonely afternoons. He looked out at the sea of faces, some curious, some sympathetic, all waiting for him to fulfill their expectations of what a disabled teenager's talent show performance should be. Instead, Tyler began to play. The opening chords were soft, almost hesitant, but there was something about the melody that seemed to reach into the audience and demand attention. It wasn't a song anyone recognized. It was Tyler's own composition, born from those hidden hours in the abandoned music room, crafted from the raw material of his 17 years of watching the world from the outside. When he began to sing, something extraordinary happened. The voice that emerged from Tyler Bennett wasn't the quiet, careful whisper his classmates knew. It was rich and powerful, carrying a depth of emotion that seemed impossible from someone so young. The lyrics spoke of dreams that felt too big for the dreamer, of hearts that beat with rhythms the world couldn't hear, of the courage it takes to believe in yourself when no one else does. The song built slowly, Tyler's voice gaining strength and confidence with each verse. His fingers moved across the guitar strings with a skill that surprised even those who had known him for years. This wasn't a teenager with a disability sharing an inspiring message. This was an artist, pure and simple, sharing his soul through music. By the chorus, the auditorium had fallen into a silence so complete that Tyler's voice seemed to fill every corner of the space. Parents leaned forward in their seats. Students who had been checking their phones put them away. Even the backstage crew stopped their preparations to listen. The song was about transformation, about finding the strength to become who you were meant to be despite a world that insisted on seeing only your limitations. Tyler sang about the music that lived inside everyone, waiting for the courage to be set free. He sang about the power of being authentically yourself, even when that self didn't fit neatly into other people's expectations. As the song reached its climax, something shifted in the auditorium. Tyler could see it in the faces looking back at him. the recognition that they were witnessing something genuine and powerful. Mrs. Patterson, the retired music teacher, had somehow made her way to the side of the auditorium, tears streaming down her face as she listened to the transformation of the music room she had left behind. When Tyler's voice soared into the final chorus, his guitar work intricate and confident, the audience seemed to collectively hold its breath. This wasn't the inspirational moment they had expected. It was something far more profound. Tyler wasn't performing despite his disability. He was performing as a complete, complex, talented human being he had always been. The final notes faded into silence, and for a moment that stretched like eternity, the auditorium remained completely quiet. Tyler sat in the spotlight, his guitar still cradled in his arms, looking out at faces that seemed to be seeing him truly for the first time. Then the applause began. It started with his parents, Robert and Michelle Bennett, rising to their feet with tears streaming down their faces. Mrs. Patterson joined them, her applause fierce and proud. One by one, the entire auditorium rose in a standing ovation that seemed to shake the old building to its foundations. But it wasn't the polite, encouraging applause Tyler had expected. This was the real thing, the kind of ovation reserved for moments when an audience knows they've witnessed something special. Brandon Sullivan was on his feet applauding, his earlier dismissive comments forgotten in the face of Tyler's undeniable talent. Ashley Morrison was crying openly, her cheerleader composure completely abandoned. As Tyler wheeled off the stage, the applause followed him into the wings where his fellow performers waited. Jackson Reed, who had seemed so confident earlier, looked at Tyler with a new respect. "Dude," he said quietly, "that was incredible. I had no idea you could do that." But perhaps the most meaningful moment came from Mrs. Anderson, who knelt beside Tyler's wheelchair with tears in her eyes. "Tyler," she said softly, "in 30 years of teaching, I've never heard anything like that. You didn't just perform tonight. You showed everyone who you really are." The talent show continued, but Tyler's performance had shifted something fundamental in the atmosphere. The remaining acts felt different somehow, as if Tyler had given everyone permission to be more authentic, more vulnerable, more real. Tyler did win the talent show. That honor won Samantha Clark's dance routine, which was technically flawless and crowd-pleasing. But as he sat in the audience watching the final acts, Tyler realized that winning had never been the point. He had done something far more important. He had shown up as himself, completely and unapologetically. In the weeks that followed, Tyler's life changed in ways both small and profound. His classmates began to see him differently, not as a disabled kid who needed their sympathy, but as Tyler, the guy with the incredible voice and guitar skills. Teachers started asking him about his music, instead of speaking to him in carefully modulated tones. Even Brandon Sullivan nodded to him in the hallways, a small gesture that somehow meant everything. More importantly, Tyler had found his voice in more ways than one. He started a YouTube channel where he posted his original songs and covers, his subscriber count growing steadily as word spread about the teenager from Wisconsin who could make you cry with his music. College scouts began to notice, and suddenly the future that had seemed so uncertain was filled with possibilities Tyler had never dared to imagine. But perhaps the most significant change was the one that happened inside Tyler himself. The boy who had spent years making himself invisible had learned the power of being seen. He understood now that his wheelchair wasn't something to overcome or inspire others with. It was simply part of who he was, no more defining than the color of his eyes or the sound of his laugh. Tyler Bennett's story reminds us that we all have music inside us waiting to be shared with the world. Sometimes that music is literal. A voice that can move audiences to tears, fingers that can coax magic from strings and keys. Sometimes it's the music of our unique perspective, our individual talents, our authentic selves that we're afraid to let others hear. The world is full of abandoned music rooms, forgotten spaces where we hide the parts of ourselves we think others won't understand or appreciate. But Tyler's courage to wheel onto that stage and share his truth teaches us that the greatest performances happen when we stop trying to be who we think others want us to be and start being who we actually are. Your wheelchair, your stutter, your anxiety, your difference, whatever it is that makes you feel like you're watching life from the sidelines, might just be the thing that makes your music unique. Tyler didn't succeed despite his disability. He succeeded because he was brave enough to be completely, authentically himself. The judges of our own lives aren't the Brandon Sullivans or the Ashley Morrisons of the world. The real judges are the people whose lives we touch when we have the courage to share our authentic selves. They're our parents in the third row, crying proud tears. They're the Mrs. Pattersons who see our potential even when we can't see it ourselves. They're the strangers on the internet who find hope in our stories. Tyler Bennett taught his high school, and eventually the world, that inspiration isn't about overcoming your differences. It's about embracing them so completely that they become the source of your strength. When he wheeled onto that stage, he wasn't a disabled teen trying to prove he could be normal. He was Tyler Bennett, sharing his gift with a world that desperately needed to hear his particular kind of music. So what's your music? What's the song you've been afraid to sing? The talent you've been hiding in your own abandoned music room? Tyler's story isn't just about a teenager who could sing. It's about the courage it takes to believe that your voice matters, that your dreams are worth pursuing, that the world needs exactly what you have to offer. The stage is waiting. The spotlight is on. And somewhere in the audience, someone needs to hear exactly the song that only you can sing.